Welcome back to the deep dive. Think about the last time you felt really, truly present, properly engaged, like where hours just flew by and you did some amazing work. Now compare that feeling to, well, how most of us spend our days, right? Juggling 6 browser tabs, notifications flashing, feeling your brain just pulled in a dozen different directions. It feels like we're drowning in digital noise, and our attention, which you could argue is our most valuable asset, we just give it away constantly.
It really is the challenge of our time, isn't it? We've got access to infinite information, which is amazing, but actually sustaining focus on any one thing, that feels almost impossible sometimes. It's like we've outsourced our attention spans.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we've plunged deep into Adam Lee's book, How to Focus. And this isn't just, another productivity checklist. Lee does a great job blending practical psychology with the neuroscience behind it and even mindfulness.
Yeah.
So our mission today is basically to pull out a real framework, a kind of blueprint for rebuilding that deep focus and actually getting some control back over our minds, moving beyond just quick hacks to changes that actually stick.
And what I found really central to Lee's work, and honestly quite refreshing, is he doesn't treat focus as this fixed thing you either have or you don't. He frames it right away as a mental muscle. And like any muscle, when it's constantly bombarded by dings and pings and forced into multitasking all the time, well, it gets weak. It really weakens. But the core idea is optimistic, actually, because like any muscle, you can retrain it. With consistent effort, deliberate practice, you can rebuild it. And that lets you work and think and, frankly, live more intentionally.
Okay, so let's start by sort of defining the battlefield, because you can't really win a war if you don't understand what you're up against. Lee kicks things off by laying out this stark reality of the attention economy, which is essentially every app, every platform, every little screen vying for your eyeballs. They're fundamentally designed, often by thousands of very smart engineers, whose job is literally to compete for your mental space.
They are engineered for addiction. That's the plain truth. And the cumulative effect, the toll of all this competition, leads straight to what Lee calls attention fatigue. That's a really crucial concept he brings up. It's that mental burnout you feel. And it's not just from tackling hard problems, it's from the constant, relentless demand of making endless micro decisions.
Oh, I know exactly that feeling. It's not just being tired, it's like there's friction in your brain.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Every single time you see a notification badge pop up or hear that little ping sound, your brain has to momentarily pause whatever deep task it was doing and make a decision. Should I check this? Is it urgent? Do I switch tabs? Respond now. That constant internal task switching, that friction as you called it, that's what drains you. It's the source of the exhaustion. Even if you never actually open the distracting app, it still wears you down. It's why you feel so overwhelmed by the end of the day, even if you feel like you haven't achieved that much.
Right. So let's get into the mechanics behind that fatigue, because Lee really does spend time on the science here. He points to 3 key biological players: dopamine, prefrontal cortex activity, and working memory. Why these 3? What makes them so central to focus?
Well, think of it as the triangle of concentration. Dopamine, that's your reward chemical, right? The digital world has basically weaponized dopamine by offering these instant, unpredictable little rewards, the notification alert, the comment, the like. That immediate hit trains your brain to constantly seek out novelty, to prioritize that surface level buzz over the deep, slow work that actually matters.
So the dopamine system is always pulling us towards the quick, easy win, the shiny object.
Precisely. No, contrast that with the prefrontal cortex, the PFC. That's like our brain's CEO, the executive function center. It handles the heavy lifting, planning, complex problem solving, deliberate focus. But this system is slow. It requires a lot of mental energy. And when dopamine spikes, it basically hijacks the PFC. You can't do deep work if your brain's CEO is constantly running to the window every time something shiny rolls by.
Okay, makes sense. And working memory, where does that fit in?
That's essentially your brain's RAM. It's short-term scratch pad. It's where you hold the information you need right now for the task at hand. But when you switch context, even just for a split second to glance at an email preview, your working memory has to dump the current info and load the new context. Lee really emphasizes that this context switching is incredibly energy intensive. And that's why he argues focus is fundamentally about managing mental energy, not just managing your time on a calendar.
That distinction is so important. You might have 2 hours blocked out on your schedule, but if your mental energy is shot from checking the news 5 times already, the focus just won't be there, right?
Exactly. The time slot is useless without the energy. And this brings us neatly to the 2 types of attention Lee differentiates, which is core to his whole mental muscle idea.
Okay.
Yeah. So first, there's voluntary attention. This is the deliberate, effortful focus we choose to direct towards a task. It's hard work. It can feel like pushing a heavy rock uphill sometimes.
Like trying to write that complex report or learn a new skill, maybe a coding language or something.
Exactly that kind of thing. Then there's involuntary attention. That's the reactive state. It's the immediate pull when your phone buzzes or a dog barks outside or, an interesting headline flashes on a website. It requires zero effort. Your attention is simply captured, pulled away. So the entire goal of Lee's framework really is to systematically strengthen that voluntary attention muscle so it can consistently override that involuntary reactive pull from the outside world.
Okay, great. So knowing the science is one thing, but let's transition now to the action plan. We need the how-to. Lee introduces several really practical techniques to actively rebuild that voluntary attention muscle. What are some of the key ones?
Well, the methods start by clearly carving out periods for that high-effort focus. The first one is a classic, but it's essential. The Pomodoro technique. Using those short, defined bursts of deep work. Traditionally, it's 25 minutes followed by short, complete breaks. No cheating on the breaks. This trains your brain, little by little, to sustain that high-intensity voluntary focus for a set period.
Right, the sprints. But the real discipline, I guess, comes from what he calls monotasking. Now, that sounds lovely in theory, but how do you actually do that? How do you enforce doing only one thing at a time in, like, a typical modern office or work-from-home setup where everything is demanding your attention?
That is the challenge, absolutely. And Lee tackles it head on. Monotasking is basically the direct counterattack against the myth of multitasking. We know multitasking doesn't really work. So monotasking requires intentional structure. He suggests things like batching similar tasks together. So designate specific, say, 30-minute blocks just for checking and responding to email, another block maybe for admin stuff. And then you reserve your peak energy hours, those deep work periods, for that single most important task of the day. No distractions allowed. It's really about creating firm boundaries for your mental energy.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not about pretending the other stuff doesn't exist, but controlling when you engage with it.
Exactly right. And paired very closely with monotasking is intentional digital fasting. And this isn't just, putting your phone down for 5 minutes. It's about aggressively, intentionally reducing your social media scrolling, your news checking, your random app usage. Lee is pretty blunt about it. Digital discipline equals mental freedom. If you don't control the inputs will control your focus, period.
Mm-hmm. He also gives us this simple escape hatch for when we inevitably hit that wall, the attention fatigue wall.
Yeah.
The attention reset ritual. What does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah, think of it like a cognitive refresh button you can press. When you realize your focus is gone, your energy is depleted, just stop. Immediately. Don't try to push through. Spend just 5, maybe 10 minutes in intentional silence. Or even better, step outside, get into nature if you can. The main point is to completely remove external stimuli and psychological demands for that short period. It connects back to basic mindfulness practice, just observing your surroundings or your breath without judgment. That helps clear out your working memory, lets the prefrontal cortex kind of reset, ready for the next focused effort.
It's easy to forget that focus isn't purely an internal skill, is it? It's so heavily influenced by our external world. Lee dedicates a whole chapter to how our surroundings, our environment, impacts our cognitive resources.
Oh, massively. Environment shapes focus profoundly. Think about visual clutter on your desk, for instance. Lee frames that as constant, low-level micro-distractions that are continually taxing your working memory, even if you don't consciously notice it. So he really stresses decluttering your physical workspace, but also optimizing sensory inputs, like, are your overhead lights too harsh? Is the room temperature making you feel restless or sleepy? These seemingly subtle factors, they all add up. They contribute to your overall cognitive load.
And he emphasizes the importance of timing, too, right? Not just space.
Absolutely. Working during your individual peak mental hours, that time of day when you naturally feel most alert and sharp, that's crucial for tackling your deep focus tasks. Trying to wrestle with your highest priority item during that mid-afternoon slump, you're just setting yourself up for failure, really. Plus, things like strategically using background soundscapes like white noise or ambient music or even pure silence, depending on what works best for your brain, that's another relatively easy win.
But none of this, the Pomodoro, the environment tweaks, none of it works if the foundation underneath is shaky.
Precisely. Lee is absolutely adamant about this. Physical health things like getting enough quality sleep, staying hydrated, getting some movement, They are not optional extras for focus. They are the non-negotiable foundation for mental clarity and sustainable attention. If you're consistently sleep deprived, for example, your prefrontal cortex simply cannot function effectively. It doesn't have the resources. You will default to that reactive, involuntary attention and get pulled off task easily.
Okay, so if we get the physical foundation right and we sort out the environment, then we can start aiming for that peak performance state.
Which brings us to the ultimate state of concentration, flow. That classic concept, popularized, of course, by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, which Lee integrates directly into this practice of deep focus. Right, flow. It's that almost magical, immersive state where you're so deeply engaged in what you're doing that time seems to just melt away. Your inner critic goes quiet, and your performance peaks, almost effortlessly, it feels like. Lee explains the critical condition needed to enter flow. It happens when the challenge of the task perfectly matches your current skill level.
Okay. So if the task is too simple for my skill level, I get bored, my mind wanders, I start looking for distractions. But if it's way too hard, I get anxious, overwhelmed, and probably procrastinate.
Exactly. That balance, that's the sweet spot. You need just enough difficulty to demand 100% of your voluntary attention, but not so much difficulty that you feel completely overwhelmed and shut down.
So how do we actually guide ourselves into that state? Especially when, distractions are banging on the door nonstop.
Well, Lee outlines 3 absolute prerequisites for entering flow. First, you must eliminate distractions. It sounds obvious, but it's completely non-negotiable. If a notification pulls you out, the flow state is broken instantly. Second, you need crystal clear goals for the specific task you're working on right now. You have to know exactly what success looks like for this session. And third, you need to establish immediate feedback loops. You need to know, moment to moment, if what you're doing is working, if it's effective. That feedback keeps you locked into the process, engaged with the task itself.
Okay. Moving from the external task now to the truly internal stuff. Lee dedicates a significant chunk to mindset, what he calls the inner game of focus. This is where we have to confront all that psychological baggage that tends to undermine our best intentions, right?
Yeah, and this is often the hardest part, isn't it? Confronting our own procrastination habits, managing that fear of failure, that nagging voice, and combating that relentless craving for instant gratification, which is basically the internal echo of that dopamine economy we talked about earlier.
So when those internal demons, those urges pop up, he offers a really practical 3-step technique for managing them in the moment, the 3 R's. Can we walk through that maybe with a quick scenario?
Sure, absolutely. Let's say you're working on, a dense financial report, deep concentration required, and suddenly out of nowhere, you get that nagging urge to just quickly check your text messages. The 3 R's are your immediate defense mechanism. So the first R is recognize. Recognize the distraction. You simply acknowledge the urge, but without judgment. You just internally say, okay, that is the craving to check messages. Just naming it like that pulls the thought out of the automatic involuntary system and puts it under the observation of your prefrontal cortex, your rational mind.
Okay, that moment of awareness. Got it.
Exactly. The second R is refocus. Immediately and deliberately bring your attention right back to the specific task at hand. Maybe it's the number on the spreadsheet or the sentence you're in the middle of writing. The key is you don't engage with the distracting thought or urge. You simply redirect your mental energy back to the work. And the third R is crucial. Reinforce. This is the training element. When you successfully manage to redirect your attention back to the task, you give yourself a small, conscious reward. Not like a piece of candy, but some internal praise. Nice one, you stayed on task. Or, good job resisting that urge. Over time, doing this consistently trains your brain. It starts to associate the feeling of successfully resisting distraction with a small positive reinforcement, thereby strengthening that voluntary focus muscle.
That sounds so much more sustainable and kinder, really, than just trying to rely on brute willpower all the time, which, let's be honest, eventually fails for most of us.
Willpower is a finite resource. It runs out. Lee strongly argues that focus has to be built from these kinds of trained habits and routines, not just raw force of will.
Which leads us perfectly into the final and maybe the most critical piece of the puzzle, sustainability. We can't just sprint mentally all day, every day. Lee makes it crystal clear that achieving profound focus demands consistent recovery periods.
Absolutely. You have to schedule recovery just as intentionally as you schedule your work blocks. He talks about mental sprints and rests, those focused, deep work blocks we mentioned, followed by short periods of actual reflection or light movement or just stepping away. You must treat your attention like a limited energy budget. If you consistently overspend, you go into attention debt and your focus capacity collapses.
And here's the recommendation that might sound the most unusual, maybe even challenging, but he insists it's vital. Boredom practice. Why on earth is practicing being bored essential for developing better focus? That seems counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it? But it's because we have, as a society, catastrophically conditioned ourselves to immediately reach for a phone or some new stimulus the instant we experience even a microsecond of stillness or emptiness. We've almost become phobic of being unoccupied. Boredom practice is the intentional act of just sitting with that stillness. Maybe when you're waiting in line or sitting on a bench without music or a podcast playing, just resisting that automatic urge to pull out the screen.
So it's like actively rewiring that default reaction to immediately seek distraction.
Exactly. If you can learn to tolerate boredom, even embrace it slightly, you're forcing your internal system to entertain itself, to generate its own focus, to sustain a quiet, non-reactive awareness. If you can master stillness, even for short periods, you gain mastery over your focus. It literally helps rewire your attention span to be more internally generated rather than constantly depending on external stimulation to feel engaged.
Okay, let's try and synthesize these key lessons then. The ultimate takeaways from Adam Lee's framework for someone listening right now.
Okay, first, remember, attention is energy. Treat it like the precious, limited resource it is. Stop letting it leak out through those uncontrolled notifications and constant switching. Second, clarity before focus. You absolutely must determine what truly matters, what your priorities are before you try to dive deep. Focusing intensely on the wrong things is just wasted energy.
Right, and that crucial insight about our internal dialogue.
Yes. Your thoughts themselves aren't the primary distraction. It's your reaction to those thoughts that derails you. That subtle shift in perspective is what makes the 3Rs technique actually work. And finally, remember that focus isn't just one thing. It's a holistic lifestyle. It's built from trained habits, yes, but also environmental controls, physical health, and critically self-compassion when you slip up. It's not just about brute willpower.
So this deep dive has hopefully given you a solid blueprint for moving from that state Lee calls attention fatigue towards sustainable focus. It's about making strategic changes, not just to your internal habits, but to your external environment too. Really, it boils down to being deliberate, being intentional with how you spend that mental energy budget every single day.
So if environment really does shape focus so much, maybe this is the provocative thought we can leave you with. What is the single biggest item? Maybe something physical on your desk, maybe a digital thing like a specific app on your phone. What's the one thing you could declutter or remove this week that would free up just 10 minutes of genuine internal mental energy for yourself? Start right there.
The power to focus, it's already inside you. You just need to respect the resource, protect it, and train that muscle. Until next time on The Deep Dive, keep digging deeper.